Blood on the border. Subscribe if you can handle the truth, like if you're ready to look straight into the dark, and comment only if you think you'll make it to the end, because once this story starts, there's no turning back. The body was discovered just before dawn, when the fog still clung to the ground like a living thing. It lay half-hidden in a drainage culvert near the border highway, a place where trucks slowed, engines groaned, and no one ever stopped long enough to ask questions. At first glance, it looked like a routine killing, another nameless casualty of organized crime, another file destined for a metal cabinet. But the men who found it knew better almost immediately. The victim was dressed in a tailored suit, Italian leather shoes still polished, no wallet, no phone, no ID. That alone wasn't unusual. What stopped the officers cold was the symbol carved shallowly into the dirt beside him, a crude crown, drawn with deliberate strokes. No blood-soaked theatrics. No message written in rage. Just a mark. Clean. Controlled. Intentional. By sunrise, the area was sealed. State police, federal agents, border security. Everyone wanted jurisdiction, and no one wanted responsibility. Because the moment that symbol was photographed and transmitted, phones started ringing in offices that never spoke to each other. Intelligence units in Washington. Organized crime task forces in Berlin. Analysts in London who specialized in conflicts that weren't supposed to touch Western soil. The crown meant only one thing. She was here. Her name was never spoken out loud in official briefings. Not at first. Instead, they used euphemisms. The subject. The principal. The female operator. But behind closed doors, in low voices and encrypted calls, they all used the same title. The Warlord Queen. No confirmed photograph. No verified birthplace. No criminal record that could survive a courtroom. Yet over the last decade, her shadow had stretched across arms routes, human trafficking corridors, cyber laundering networks, and private militias that didn't officially exist. Governments denied her. Criminals feared her. Intelligence agencies failed to catch her. And now, a man tied to 3 multinational investigations was dead on a highway thousands of miles from where she was supposed to operate. The investigation was handed to a joint task force led by Special Agent Daniel Mercer, a man whose career had been built on cases that never made the news. Mercer arrived before the fog burned off, standing silently over the culvert, hands in his coat pockets, eyes fixed on the symbol. He didn't ask who found the body. He didn't ask how long it had been there. Instead, he asked one question. Who else has seen this? Because if the wrong people recognized the crown, the damage would already be done. The victim was identified within hours, though not officially. His name, buried behind shell companies and offshore accounts, was known to intelligence agencies as a logistics broker, someone who moved things that weren't supposed to move and made them disappear once they did. Weapons. Cash. People. He had testified once, years earlier, under a different name, in exchange for immunity that never truly protected him. He had been running again. And someone had noticed. As the forensic team worked in near silence, Mercer walked the perimeter. Tire impressions suggested the body had been placed, not dumped. No signs of a struggle. No witnesses. Whoever had done this had planned it carefully, choosing a location that sat just far enough from surveillance zones to create jurisdictional confusion. It was a signature move. By mid-morning, intelligence analysts confirmed what Mercer already suspected. The symbol had appeared before, once in Eastern Europe, once in North Africa, once in a classified report from a failed peacekeeping mission that ended in silence and sealed files. Every time, it marked the end of someone who had crossed an invisible line. The Warlord Queen didn't kill often. She executed statements. As news of the discovery leaked through unofficial channels, panic rippled through criminal networks that thrived on the illusion of anonymity. Phones were destroyed. Meetings canceled. Couriers vanished. Somewhere in a coastal city thousands of miles away, a man emptied his safe and fled before nightfall. The crown had meaning, and it meant no one was untouchable anymore. Mercer's team began reconstructing the victim's last 72 hours. Security footage showed him checking into a roadside motel under a false name. He ordered room service once. Never turned on the TV. Made 3 calls from a burner phone, each less than a minute long. All 3 numbers were dead ends. Except one. A call placed at 2:17 a.m. to a satellite phone registered to a humanitarian NGO that didn't exist on paper anymore. That was when the case stopped being local. The NGO had once been legitimate, on the surface. Medical aid, food distribution, conflict zone relief. But years earlier, intelligence reports suggested it had been absorbed into a shadow network that blurred the line between aid and arms, protection and control. And at the center of that network was a woman who never appeared in photographs, never used the same voice twice, and never stayed in one country long enough to be arrested. She recruited with ideology, ruled with precision, and punished with silence. And now, she had reached into the West. As Mercer dug deeper, resistance appeared almost immediately. Files delayed. Requests denied. Data scrubbed before it could be accessed. Someone somewhere didn't want this case to move forward. That alone told him everything he needed to know. This wasn't just organized crime. This was influence. A breakthrough came late that night, buried inside an unrelated customs seizure report. A shipping container flagged months earlier for false documentation had been rerouted at the last minute by a private security firm. That firm had no public clients, no website, no listed employees. But it had moved millions of dollars worth of equipment across 3 continents without triggering a single alarm. Mercer stared at the name on the file. It was one he had seen before. Always on the edges of investigations. Always legally insulated. Always gone before subpoenas arrived. A front. For her. As the task force began connecting the dots, another development hit. One that shifted the entire tone of the investigation from controlled urgency to outright fear. A second body was found. This one wasn't hidden. It was displayed. In a public plaza overseas, far from the highway culvert, but marked with the same symbol. Same precision. Same message. 2 men, connected only by one thing. They had both attempted to sell information about her network. She was sending a warning. Not just to criminals. To anyone watching. Mercer realized something then that none of the briefings had prepared him for. This wasn't a criminal reacting to pressure. This was a strategist shaping a narrative. Every move was calculated to destabilize, intimidate, and assert control without ever showing her face. And if she was escalating now, it meant something had changed. Someone had threatened her empire. Or she had decided it was time to expand it. Late that night, Mercer returned to the evidence room alone. He stood in front of the board, photos and maps illuminated by harsh, white light. Lines crisscrossed continents. Names blurred together. But at the center of it all was the same absence, a woman no one could fully describe. No fingerprints. No confirmed voice. The invisible empire. By the time dawn broke over 3 continents, the task force understood a brutal truth. This wasn't a manhunt. It was a siege. Daniel Mercer watched the screens cycle through satellite feeds and encrypted message logs, each one a window into a world designed to stay unseen. He had spent years chasing criminal networks that thrived on chaos, gangs that fought for corners, syndicates that flaunted wealth, bosses who needed attention the way they needed air. This was different. The Warlord Queen's empire didn't shout. It breathed. Quiet, disciplined, patient. The second body had done its job. Panic was spreading, not just among criminals but among institutions. Old contacts went silent. Trusted informants asked for extraction. In one case, a source who had worked with Western intelligence for nearly a decade sent a single message before disappearing. She knows who talks. The task force accelerated, pushing past bureaucratic resistance that suddenly felt less like red tape and more like sabotage. When Mercer requested financial records tied to the private security firm, he received a sanitized summary instead of raw data. When he asked for satellite imagery over a suspected transit corridor, the footage arrived with a 6-hour gap, precisely the window they needed most. Someone inside the system was slowing them down. And someone else was helping her. The first real crack came from an unexpected place. A European journalist named Elise Kovac, known for exposing corruption cases that others wouldn't touch. She had been digging into aid organizations operating in post-conflict zones, tracking how relief supplies vanished and reappeared as leverage. Her reporting never mentioned the Warlord Queen by name, but the pattern was unmistakable. Communities stabilized under her influence, then locked into dependence. Protection replaced governance. Loyalty replaced law. When Mercer finally spoke to Elise through a secure channel, she didn't sound surprised. "I was wondering when you'd call," she said. "You found the crown." She explained what intelligence agencies wouldn't put on paper. The Warlord Queen didn't seize territory with violence alone. She offered order where chaos reigned, paid salaries when governments couldn't, and punished betrayal swiftly enough to become legend. To some, she was a criminal mastermind. To others, a necessary evil. To the people under her control, she was untouchable. "She doesn't destroy systems," Elise said. "She replaces them." As Mercer listened, another update came in. One of the task force's analysts had vanished during a routine commute. No witnesses. No ransom. His apartment was untouched, except for his laptop gone. He had been working on the NGO front companies. The message was unmistakable. She wasn't just reacting anymore. She was closing in. The investigation shifted into damage control. Mercer ordered all personnel moved to secure locations, communications limited to face-to-face briefings and isolated networks. Even then, information leaked. Meeting times changed at the last minute without authorization. Surveillance teams reported being followed by professionals who never crossed a line, never made a move that justified arrest. Ghosts, protecting a ghost. A breakthrough arrived from an old case file buried deep in military archives. Years earlier, during a failed stabilization mission, a female negotiator had appeared unannounced at a ceasefire meeting. No official credentials. No security detail. She spoke calmly, promised resources, and within weeks, rival factions stopped fighting. Violence dropped. Aid flowed. Then the mission collapsed. The negotiator vanished. And the region fell under the control of militias loyal to a single, unseen authority. The description was vague. Height, accent, age, all inconsistent. But one detail stood out. Every witness remembered her eyes. Not their color. Their effect. Focused. Measuring. As if she were memorizing everyone in the room. Mercer felt the pieces aligning into a shape he didn't like. This wasn't a criminal hiding from power. This was power hiding from recognition. As pressure mounted, governments began to argue behind closed doors. Some wanted the case buried, fearing exposure of past compromises. Others pushed for a quiet resolution, hoping containment was still possible. Mercer pushed back harder, knowing that containment was already an illusion. Then the third incident happened. A secure evidence vault in a European capital was breached without triggering alarms. Files connected to the task force, hard copies believed immune to digital intrusion, were removed selectively. Not stolen wholesale. Curated. Someone knew exactly what to take. Among the missing documents was a sealed interview transcript from years earlier. A detained arms broker, interrogated under a deal that never went public. His final statement had been dismissed as misdirection at the time. Now it read like a warning no one had understood. "She doesn't sit at the top," the broker had said. "She stands behind the chair." Mercer finally grasped the scale of the threat. The Warlord Queen wasn't just influencing criminals and war zones. She was embedded within legitimate systems, outsourcing, subcontracting, advising. Invisible where she needed to be, decisive where she chose to act. And now she was pruning the tree. Elise sent another message, her tone urgent. She had found something, financial flows converging on a holding company registered under a dead man's name. The funds weren't just moving weapons or personnel. They were underwriting elections, infrastructure projects, security reforms. Influence laundering. Before Mercer could respond, her signal dropped. Hours passed. Then a photo arrived from an anonymous source. Elise's press badge lay on a concrete floor. No blood. No context. Just the badge. The task force split. Some wanted extraction operations launched immediately. Others argued that overt moves would provoke retaliation. Mercer knew both were right, and both were already too late. That night, a classified briefing reached his desk, marked with an authorization code he'd never seen before. Inside was a single-page directive: suspend all active pursuit. Stand down pending review. No justification. No signature. Just silence. Mercer stared at the page, feeling the weight of the realization settle in. This wasn't a rogue criminal defying governments. This was a system negotiating with her.
He didn't comply.
Instead, he made a decision that would end his career if it failed. He shared everything, files, names, patterns, with a small circle of trusted investigators across borders. No centralized command. No hierarchy. Just fragments, distributed so that no single breach could erase the truth. As dawn approached, one of those investigators called him, voice barely steady. "We found the basement," she said. A property long suspected of being a logistics hub, empty on paper, unremarkable from the outside. Inside, behind a locked steel door, they discovered a planning room frozen in time. Maps annotated in multiple languages. Timelines extending years into the future. And at the center of it all, a single chair positioned beneath the spotlight. No DNA. No fingerprints. But etched into the metal tabletop in front of the chair was the same crude symbol, the crown. And beneath it, a sentence carved so lightly it was almost missed. "You were never meant to see this." As Mercer absorbed the words, his secure phone vibrated with one final alert. A new disappearance. Someone close. And this time, the clock wasn't just ticking. It was counting down. The crown without a throne. The call came just before sunrise, the kind that didn't ring so much as detonate in the chest. The person who had disappeared wasn't an analyst or a journalist or a peripheral source. It was one of Mercer's own, an investigator who had helped scatter the files, who knew the contingency plan, who understood why the truth had to be fragmented to survive. Last seen entering a parking structure beneath a government annex. No exit recorded. Cameras disabled for exactly 4 minutes. 4 minutes was all it took. Mercer didn't shout. He didn't curse. He sat perfectly still, listening to the silence on the other end of the line, and finally understood the final lesson the Warlord Queen had been teaching them all along. Power didn't need to announce itself. It only needed to be felt. The task force was no longer a task force. It was a liability. Governments began to reposition quietly. Travel advisories were updated with vague language. Joint operations were postponed indefinitely. Officials who had once demanded progress now spoke in cautious hypotheticals. The case, they said, had become too complex. The risk of escalation was unacceptable. What they meant was simpler. She was too embedded to confront. Mercer went underground, not literally but close enough. Safe houses rotated nightly. Communications were reduced to dead drops and handwritten notes photographed and destroyed. The investigators who remained did so knowing the cost. Careers would end. Reputations would be shredded. Some of them might disappear. But they also knew something else. The Warlord Queen was moving faster now. And fast was not her style. The next strike didn't come as a killing. It came as a correction. A major financial institution in a Western capital announced an internal review after irregularities were discovered in a portfolio tied to overseas development projects. No names were mentioned. No crimes alleged. Yet within hours, executives resigned, board members vanished from public view, and a quiet settlement was reached that redirected billions in assets. Those assets flowed into the same constellation of shell companies Elise Kovac had been tracking before she disappeared. Mercer stared at the data, seeing the pattern snap into place. The killings had been punctuation. The real sentence was influence. Markets, elections, infrastructure, these were the levers. Violence was simply the reminder of what happened when negotiations failed. Then, finally, the mistake. It was small, almost elegant. A shipment moved too quickly. In her world, speed was dangerous. Speed created witnesses. And this time, a Port Authority clerk noticed a discrepancy in container weights that didn't match the manifest. The alert triggered an inspection request that couldn't be canceled without exposing too much. Inside the container were modular communications units, military-grade, untraceable, designed to establish secure networks in unstable regions. Except this destination wasn't unstable. It was Western, urban, connected. She wasn't expanding outward anymore. She was consolidating inward. Mercer and his remaining allies acted without authorization. The container was tracked through a chain of subcontractors to a warehouse owned by a real estate trust that, on paper, specialized in luxury redevelopment. The building sat quiet at the edge of a revitalized district, glass, steel, and plausible deniability. They entered at night. What they found wasn't a command center in the traditional sense. No rows of screens. No armed guards. Just offices. Meeting rooms. A data suite humming softly behind biometric locks. And in the deepest room, behind reinforced glass, a table set for one. The chair was empty, but the room told a story. Maps again. Not just of conflict zones, but of cities, transport hubs, financial districts, political centers. Lines drawn not in ink, but in projected light, shifting as algorithms recalculated risk and opportunity. This wasn't a lair. It was a planning instrument. On the table lay a folder. No markings. No security seals. Inside was a single document, a memorandum of understanding between a consortium of private interests and an unnamed advisor. The terms were chilling in their simplicity: stability in exchange for discretion, efficiency in exchange for access, order in exchange for silence. Signed not with a name, but with a symbol: the crown. As Mercer absorbed the implications, the lights dimmed. The door behind them sealed with a pneumatic hiss. A voice filled the room, not amplified, not theatrical.
Calm.
Female. Controlled. "You've been very persistent," it said. Mercer turned slowly, heart pounding, knowing this was the closest anyone had ever come. "I wondered when you'd stop chasing me," the voice continued, "and start looking at yourselves." He demanded to know where Elise was, where his colleague was, what she wanted. There was a pause, almost thoughtful. "I want what you already chose," she said. "Predictability. I offer it where your systems fail. I remove volatility. I end wars before they spread. You call it crime because you don't control it." Mercer realized then that she wasn't threatening them. She was explaining herself. "You can't arrest me," the voice went on. "Not because you're weak. Because I don't exist where your laws apply. I operate in the spaces you leave ungoverned. The contracts you don't read. The compromises you don't admit." He asked her why now. Why escalate? Another pause. "Because empires don't fall from enemies," she said. "They fall from neglect." The lights returned. The door unlocked. And the voice was gone. No chase followed. No arrest. By the time authorities arrived, summoned anonymously, precisely timed, the warehouse was empty.
Clean.
Legally owned. Nothing actionable left behind. The story that reached the public was sanitized beyond recognition. A financial scandal. A regulatory oversight. A restructuring. No mention of a Warlord Queen. No crown. Elise Kovac resurfaced weeks later in another country, alive, shaken, unwilling to speak. Mercer's colleague was never found. Officially, the case ended. Unofficially, it metastasized. Mercer resigned quietly. He handed over what remained of the files to people he trusted less than before, but more than the system. He moved to a city where no one knew his name, carrying the weight of knowledge that had no courtroom. Months passed. Then, on a cold morning, a body was found in a place no one expected, inside a private boardroom overlooking a river, accessed only by keycard and invitation. No signs of struggle. No witnesses. On the table, etched lightly into polished wood, was the symbol. Not a threat, a reminder. Investigators would later note something unsettling. The victim wasn't a criminal in any traditional sense. No indictments. No investigations. Just a decision-maker. Someone who had tried to back out of a deal they didn't fully understand. The Warlord Queen remained unseen, unnamed, unchallenged, and somewhere, in rooms that would never appear on a map, plans continued to unfold, quietly shaping the world, one invisible agreement at a time. They thought the empire needed a throne. They were wrong. If you think this story was intense, you're not ready for the next one. Hit subscribe because some truths don't stay buried, and the crown is still moving.